Do me a huge favor, look at the person you are sitting next to, look them in the eye and tell them, you look marvelous, simply marvelous. Somebody said, I look marvelous and I feel marvelous. How many of you, by show of hands, this is your first WFF? Awesome, welcome home. How many of you, by show of hands, you are a leader with direct reports? Okay. How many of you, by show of hands, are a leader as an individual contributor? Just so I know where you are. Okay, great. And then last question, how many of you, this is your first time seeing me? Okay, so quick backstory, 35 years of experience in the hospitality industry, live in Orlando, Florida, married to an amazing woman named Jody. We have 4 children from 20 to 27. We just became grandparents about 15 months ago. Our grandchild, her name is Halo. I told them I'm too young to be called granddad. I am G-pop, I'm just saying. My last corporate job was sales director and new business development director for the Disney Institute. Left Disney 20 years ago, and since that time I've worked with almost 2,300 organizations in 54 countries. I'm also a LinkedIn Learning instructor, and one of our courses called Building Business Relationships. Everything that I learned at Disney, did some work for Ritz-Carlton, everything comes down to relationships. So those courses are available. So today we're going to talk about how do we spark empathetic leadership. My goal is to come alongside and share with you 3 insights, give you about 6 micro practices that you can implement, and to ensure that you walk away with 2 tools. Just a quick heads up, I will be inviting you throughout our time just to maybe turn to your neighbor and kind of share. Part of the reason why I do that is adult learning says post-pandemic is that you are a subject matter expert. So it's important for you, oh brilliant one. You do know that you're sitting next to oh brilliant one, right? Just say good morning, oh brilliant one. Good morning. Somebody said, I'm glad you finally recognize. You may be slow, but you're worth waiting on. All right. So I may invite you to share with oh brilliant one, all right? So with that said, there are 3 trends that all of you are very familiar with. And when I talk about building a positive culture, it really looks at when the alarm clock goes off on Monday morning. What do your direct reports feel and think about, okay, today it's going to be awesome? Or is it just, you know, I'm just a Bill, well, I'm only a Bill, and I'm sitting here in Capitol Hill, right? So what does that look like? So what I'm discovering with some organizations, number one, they're taking time in building that positive culture to ask individuals, hey, tell me about how you are doing, number one. Number 2, what is one positive thing that you've discovered within the last 24, 48, 72 hours? Just asking that question and building that positive culture. It's also understanding, here's what the research says, 1 minute spent on recognition creates 100 minutes of initiative. So this ability to understand what gets recognized gets repeated. Every person that works with you, as we think about employee well-being, when you look at employee well-being is when I know that I am recognized and I'm valued, it's because my leader knows my appreciation language. Everyone has appreciation language. So how do I begin to appreciate people in understanding that they want to feel well, they want to be well? So how do we come alongside and invite them to look at what they're doing right, not just what they're doing wrong, okay? And then psychological safety, which you're very familiar with, but something to consider. Have we created a culture within our team where it's safe to push back? It's safe to say, hey, what about this? Can we think about this in a fresh way? All right, so these 2 leaders along my 35-year journey really shaped me. On the far left is Pat, on the far right, your far right is Valerie. 2 things that they taught me. Number 1 is to be intentional about what you do. Number 2, when you walk in the room, own the room because you are supposed to be in the room. And I stand here today because they would not allow me to play small. They both invited me to understand it's not who you are that holds you back, it's who you think you're not that holds you back. And sometimes you focus more on who you think you're not instead of who you really are. So before you can spark empathetic leadership, you have to start with being empathetic towards yourself, all right? So with that said, I'm going to share with you a video that kind of sets up everything that we're going to walk through. This is an interview that I did with Dr. Jean Watson. Dr. Jean Watson is a scholar at the University of Colorado at Boulder. 40 years of her research has been around caring science. She is known in the healthcare field as the Lady Gaga of nursing. And one of the things that she teaches, which I'm going to walk us through as we think about empathetic leadership, is the whole power of being, belonging, becoming. And I'm going to unpack that, but then I'm going to come alongside and give us some specific things to take away. So I want you to listen to how she unpacks how we as leaders should be thinking about creating what I call a human-centric organization, a human-centric team. For those of you who are leaders as individual contributors, how do I show up and really think about human beings, not just human doings? All right, so listen to what she shares.
The things you talk about in your work, and there are leaders that are listening to us right now, you talk about the power of being, belonging, and becoming.
Yes.
What would you say to leaders listening to us right now who are wanting to embrace this approach to being, becoming, belonging? How do they start?
They start with self. The self of the leader has to undergo a transformation because they have to discover their own power and their own strength and their own authenticity and who they are. And from that place, they also need to cultivate a higher consciousness and language of this phenomenon of our humanity. One of the reasons we are having such a gap is that we have not had a language of the phenomenon of human caring. How do we look at outcomes when you don't even have a language? And in this postmodern era, if you don't have a language of a phenomenon of human caring and healing and health and wholeness for humanity, well, we're just going to succumb to the traditional mindset of just, controlling people, and also really reducing people to the moral status of objects.
So when we talk about caring and when we talk about being a human-centric leader, it's really understanding how do we start with self in our being. And I start here because it's not just about doing. How many of you, by show of hands, have days when you've been pulled in a million directions? How many of you have days when everybody wants a piece of you? All right. So here's a question. Don't raise your hand, but I want you to think with me for a moment. On a scale of 1 to 10, how are you doing right now? Let's take it a step further. On a scale of 1 to 10, how are you doing professionally? On a scale of 1 to 10, how are you doing personally? And why is that important? For years, we focused on time management, but for leaders of the future, it's about energy management. And how do I start with self? By slowing down to the speed of the moment and understanding that I must connect with myself and focus on what I call being. So the new leader of the future understands I have to be healthy for myself so that I can be healthy for others. Practical takeaway, make the note, take your meds. All right? Everybody say this with me. Say, Simon says, take my meds. Meds is an acronym. Meditate. Everybody say meditate. Exercise. Diet. Sleep. Take your meds. Being. So if I'm going to be better for everyone else, because everyone feeds off of my energy, how do I take care of myself? Because how you start the day determines the day, okay? So let's unpack this a little bit. One of the things that is taught in caring science is this whole thing called keratos. Keratos means to cherish, okay? So when I have a keratos approach to my leadership style, I'm specifically looking at my own consciousness as to how do I feel? What do I think? What do I say? Because words carry energy. If everything speaks, every email or Slack message that you send, it carries energy. So when I think about consciousness, before I hit send, I step back and I say, is this my true being or am I just responding to move on? Okay? Then when we talk about practice equanimity, it's really looking at how do I see the whole person, the whole human being, and not just the person that we say, bring us your head and your hands, but coat check your heart at the door. So when I'm practice equanimity, I see you, and it's a judge-free zone because I'm inviting you to understand I get you. Here's the other thing when you think about heart-centered intelligence. Heart-centered intelligence is letting go of the ego. Ego is important, but sometimes ego stands for edging greatness out, and we move to eco, encouraging, caring often. Heart-centered intelligence. And then authentic listening. So one of my greatest failures professionally, I'm working at Disney, get promoted to my first leadership role, and I was a jerk of a boss. Ellie, is it Ellie? Okay, Ellie, raise your hand. This is Ellie. I don't want y'all to think I'm talking to my imaginary friend. Who's Ellie? I don't see Ellie. So Ellie, I get promoted, and Disney was about to invite me to find my happiness elsewhere, okay? I was sales director and new business development director for the Disney Institute. So HR shows up with organizational development, and it was not a very pixie-dusted conversation. And what I recognized is I had selective hearing instead of authentic listening. My selective hearing was I had a need to be right. Instead of having authentic listening and understanding the same letters that spell the word listen, spell the word silent. So when I'm truly listening to you, I'm releasing that need to be in control and understanding what wants to emerge. So this whole keratos transformational leader now is really understanding that if Ellie and I are in a conversation, scientists say, Ellie, if you were to measure our heartbeat in the moment, our heartbeat would be beating at the same pace, and the conversation would be like a tennis match, serve, volley, because you know that I am honoring you as a human being in that moment, listening to understand instead of listening to respond. Okay? So let me give you some quick micro practices. So the first micro practice is called centering, and here's something I love for us to do. Everyone sit up straight, feet flat on the ground, please. Okay? And in a moment, I'm going to invite us into an exercise that Dr. Watson taught called centering. So I'm going to invite us in a moment when I count to 3 to close your eyes, and we're going to take a deep breath. Inhale, exhale. When you inhale, you're inhaling the goodness and letting go of whatever you're carrying. We're going to do this 3 times, okay? On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Awesome. 1, 2, 3. Amazing. Last time. 1, 2, 3. Okay, open your eyes. The micro practice of centering is creating internal alignment of head, heart, hands, so that the feet can follow. Okay? When I am understanding how to be centered, what I am doing is in that moment, I am stopping everything and I'm becoming one within myself. This is an exercise that you can do with your team in person or virtually, but taking just that moment to get centered is also something that you can do before you go into another Zoom call, another in-person meeting, where you just step back and you get centered. Now you're probably saying, Simon, why is that important? When you go to setting intentions, here's the question. What is one word, or as Carla shared yesterday, adjective, that encapsulates your leadership journey as you think about fiscal 23 or the rest of this year? What is one word, one adjective that just encapsulates how you intend to lead, okay? And when you think of that one word, I want you to share it with Oh Brilliant One, all right? 15 seconds, go. Share, what's the one word, adjective, that encapsulates you as a leader? One word, one. Okay. All right. Okay, real quick. Let me hear, what did you come up with? What did you share with Oh Brilliant One? What's one? Caring, presence, decisiveness, creativity. What else? Positivity. Determined. Compassion. What else? Collaborative. Nurturing. Purpose. Okay, so 2 things. Number 1, write it down. Write down what you just said. If you think it, ink it. All right? I said that as a mental post-it note. If you think it, ink it. All right. Second thing, as we think about setting intentions, how you start the day determines the day. So if we take our meds in our meditation time, I want to invite you to take control of the steering wheel of the day of the week by going back to that intention of nurturing. How do I intend to nurture? How do I intend to be compassionate? How do I intend whatever you wrote down and share it with Oh Brilliant One? You're probably saying, Simon, why is that important? When you take control of the steering wheel of the future, you're saying to the backseat passengers of fear, stress, and worry, I got this. And I'm not going to allow whatever happens that day to derail me. Setting intentions, okay? Then when we talk about being in the moment, Dr. Daniel Kahneman, Professor Emeritus at Princeton University and Nobel Prize-winning laureate, says in his research, there are 19,200 daily moments. How many? All right, think with me for a moment. A moment creates momentum. Momentum creates monumental results. Reverse engineer. The root word for momentum is what? Moments. So how do I, as a leader, be in the moment? Because compounded moments over time, how I've used my energy creates the momentum, even when things seem like they've gone south. So how do I reset, start back, get centered, so that I can listen beyond the words? When I listen beyond the words, so I'll give you an example. I made a $50,000 mistake at Disney. And I said, oh snap, they about to fire me, okay? Because I didn't get the final approval from my leader, even though I had P&L responsibility, I didn't get the approval. I'm like, they about to ask a brother to bounce, okay? So, insert bless his little heart, right? So, I pack up my office, and my boss happened to come, this guy named Larry Lynch, and I reported to him. He come to my office, he's like, what are you doing? I was like, here's my resignation letter. And Ellie said to me, what are you talking about? I said, I just made this mistake, And he said, unpack your office. We just invested $50,000 in your education. Don't do it again. And I was like, rut-row. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Mickey, just keep feeding Mickey green cheese, all right? But what he listened beyond the words to say, this is just a moment in time or a character building moment, okay? So something else you can do with your teams, because when you hear these, you see these micro practices, you're probably saying, okay, Simon, what is something I can do practical? With your team, next time, have everybody take out a sheet of paper and write at the top of the paper what's right about me, okay? And give them 30 seconds, set the timer, and say go. And have them write down everything that's right about them. And then stop it after 30 seconds and say, okay, here's the deal. The next time something happens, here's what's right instead of what's wrong. Because so much time is spent on what's wrong, and it causes a person to diminish and eventually shut down. So we as leaders, we want to be mindful, God bless you, we want to be mindful of how we invite people in a spirit of being to say, we get you, it's going to be okay, all right? Now, let's build on this, and let's talk about the power of care. So I'm going to share a video with you from Daphne E. Jones. I interviewed her a few months ago. Daphne is the former Chief Information Officer for GE Healthcare Services, former Senior Vice President of Technology at Johnson & Johnson, phenomenal person, serves on 3 corporate Fortune 500 boards, billion-dollar companies, and has written a book called Win When They Say You Won't. Phenomenal book, highly recommend it. And I asked her, I said, okay, when we talk about care, there's obviously caring for the person, the team, the department, the division, the organization. But I said, where should we really start? And she began to help me understand how to start with yourself, like in caring about yourself and your career. So I want you to hear something that she shares. And here's the thing. I sent in my presentation to WFF a month ago, and some of what you hear may sound a lot like what Carla shared on yesterday. So it's very serendipitous that Carla shared what you shared, but I want you to hear what Daphne shares.
I learned about the power of PIE, P-I-E, by Harvey Coleman. I write about that in the book as well. And PIE is your performance, your image, and your exposure, P-I-E. My mom always talked about, Daphne, you just do your job right and they will promote you. They will notice you. You're going to be just fine. No, that's not true, because you wonder why this person who was behind you in terms of years or experience is now in front of you as your boss. That's because they understood the I and the E. The performance, you're already doing your job. You're doing it well. You're doing it early. You're spending less money than you thought you would or whatever. But it's the I is your image. And your image is how you look. It's how you dress, how clean you are and whatever. But it's also your brand. When Daphne's coming into a meeting, do they say, oh my God, here she comes again. We're going to get nothing done. That's your image. Or when they know she's coming into a meeting, they're like, oh yeah, we're going to do good today. We're going to probably get done in half an hour because, she's going to add so much value. Or is she collaborative? Is she stingy? Is she complain a lot? Is she always late? Whatever. That's your image. And your E is exposure. Who do you know and who knows you? Who will speak for you when you're not on Zoom and not in the room? Oh, you got to see my friend Daphne. She is amazing. She speaks Spanish. She's lived in Brazil for 5 years, and she has the ability to start up a company and scale it 3x. And so that is somebody who, if they don't know you though, if they're not exposed to you, they won't know you can do that. And so part of my job was to perform well, was to follow the leaders who were doing their thing and seem to be getting promoted well. And then it was also to make sure that people knew who I was, not to overexpose myself. One day I was on my way home from Johnson & Johnson. And I saw my picture on a billboard on the freeway in New Jersey. I'm like, because, everybody else sees that image and they want to know, are you getting your work done? Are you posing for a Vogue magazine or something while your picture's on a billboard? But it was because I was the face of diversity at that moment in terms of my leadership. But that was an overexposure thing because everybody's driving to J&J the same way kind of a thing and they see it. So you don't want to be overexposed, but you don't want to be underexposed.
Okay, so real quick, turn to your neighbor and I'd like for you to answer 2 questions. First question is, what is your image right now in your place of business? And what are you doing to get positive exposure? All right? What's your image? What are you doing to get exposure? Go. Share. Okay. Thirty seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Couple of things. Part of the reason why I'm also inviting you to share with Oh Brilliant One is because as they're sharing, you are also learning through their lens. And if it's something that you haven't thought about before, when they say it, you're like, what? It becomes like that joy bomb that is so good. Second thing to think about as it relates to exposure, specifically for those of you who are leaders with direct reports, how often do you give your team members exposure to other areas of the organization intentionally? Because it's in that exposure where they come back and it's like amazing. So one of the things that exposed me in my time at Disney, whenever the parks get really busy in the summer, it's all hands on deck. And if you look at me, I am all about the air condition. I'm not trying to work in anybody's theme park in the months of June, July, and August trying to work on my Godiva tan. But one day I had to go and work at MGM Studios, Sunset Boulevard, and my responsibility was to sweep the streets. So I've got on a blue smock, a broom, a dustpan in my hand, and I'm just like, wah, wah, wah. I am not feeling the love, Ellie. I'm like, whatever. But how many of y'all saw the movie Enemy of the State with Gene Hackman and Will Smith? How many of y'all saw that movie? Ellie, it dawned on me that the Mickey police might be watching me through the camera. And I needed my job. So some guests were coming towards me, because at Disney, you never call them customers, you call them guests. They caught a glimpse of my name tag that says Simon from Buffalo, New York. And they said, you're from Buffalo, New York? I said, yes. They said, we're from Buffalo. Like, no way. They're like, where'd you go to school? Where'd you grow up? What's your parents' names? Ellie, I didn't know these people from Adam's house, can't let alone from a can of paint, but we're having a major conversation. So I said, what have you done since you've been here at Disney? They're like, oh, we're going to Epcot, we're going to Magic Kingdom. I said, now that you're here at MGM, you got to ride Tower of Terror. How many of you have ever been on Tower of Terror? Okay, for those of you who have not been on Tower of Terror, think with me for a moment. 13-story elevator shaft that takes you up, drops you, you scream your bloody guts out. It is phenomenal. And I said, when you get done, experience Indiana Jones and eat at the Brown Derby, which is old Hollywood with a Disney twist. So a couple of hours later, I'm back at my desk drinking something cold to cool off. And that's when I had the whack upside the head. Disney never sent me out to the park to sweep the streets. Disney sent me out to the park to expose me to a family that, according to Disney Business Analytics, had probably saved 3 to 5 years of their discretionary income to come to Disney for maybe once in their lifetime. And a family of 4 in a 7-day stay will spend about $10,000. So what I begin to understand is, and what I'm about to say, I mean this figuratively, not literally, I quit my job at Disney and I went to work at Disney, because I realized Disney was trying to create, for me, belonging. Understanding that I really belong in the culture by exposing me out of my little silo, what they call over in Europe, my stovepipe of what I've been hired to do. So exposure is very important. So when we talk about belonging, Dr. Maria Music, who is a clinical psychiatrist at the University of Michigan, says in her research, human beings need 3 things right now. Number 1, to be seen, valued, and understood. When we create this belonging environment, let me walk you through some of the keratos leadership attributes. It's creating what I call conscious inclusion. Now, I could stand here and say, conscious inclusion, but here's what I want to do. I want you to go back into your quick little cohort, and I'd like for you to share with Oh Brilliant One, what does conscious inclusion look like right now in your environment? How is conscious inclusion behaving? What is it saying? How is it showing up in your culture, in your company? I'm going to give you a minute and a half. We'll come back together. Go. 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So let me offer up a few suggestions and recommendations as it relates to conscious inclusion, okay? Let me start with the research first, and then we'll unpack this. According to the Institute for Corporate Productivity, teams that have high collaboration are 5 times more productive because, number one, everyone's voice is heard. How do we ensure, from a conscious inclusive mindset, that everyone has a chance to raise their voice, share their opinion, give their feedback? Number 2, how do we ensure we champion the ideas when they are first teed up? Point in case, I'm sitting in a meeting and one of our female colleagues tees up an idea and there was radio silence. Meeting goes on, guy down the table mentions the same idea that she said, and it was like, oh my goodness, that was phenomenal. You know, golf clap. Hold on, time out. Where was the champion to say, that's not your idea, she just said the same thing? And what will happen is she has brilliant ideas, but they'll never be heard because she's going to shut down because that joker is going to poach my idea. Does the word joker translate here? I was just having a moment. Y'all have to excuse me, I don't get out much. So champion that idea. Another way to think about conscious inclusion is there's a difference between, and I want y'all to just hear my heart for a second. There's a difference between pressure and practice, and there's a difference between a statement and a standard. Can y'all hear that? So when we talk about conscious inclusion, you know, after the murder of George Floyd, everybody had the kumbaya moment and went into the press with all these wonderful things, but it wasn't a part of the culture of the company. So conscious inclusion is not just ethnicity, it's also how are we cognitively engaging intellectually, no matter where people are coming from, so everyone knows that I am included with the future direction of the organization. Can y'all hear that? Right? So then that leads us to relational, because we don't get to relational until I know that I'm included. Why is that important? Make the note. Relationships are the currency of the future. So when we break the word relationship down, your name is? So Patty, is it with a Y or I? What? Give me a little something, something, Patty. What? Okay. So Patty with a Y, when I talk about relationships, I relate to the cargo in your ship. I relate to your experiences, your education, your know-how, how you get things done. And wherever we are going on the ocean of life, based on that last interaction, that moment, you carry me on the ocean. I carry you on the ocean. So when I understand, so you're saying, Simon, how do I, from a belonging standpoint, create better relationships? How many of you have virtual meetings with your team members? Okay, so here's a quick little exercise. The next time you have the team virtually, have everyone say, hey, before we get into the heart of the meeting, I want you to find a personal object that's there in your home office, your house, and I want you to bring it on screen and give us the backstory of what this means. Piece of art, artifact, whatever that is. Why? Because we want that person just to lower their defenses just for a moment and tell us they were once upon a time. Tell us that backstory. What does that do? It takes them out of the blocking and the tackling and the KPIs and the measurements and customer satisfaction and all those things that we focus on to say, you see me as a person because I'm sharing something that's near and dear to me. Okay? For those of you who are leaders as individual contributors, if the meeting is set for 11 a.m. virtually, show up 10 to 15 minutes early. Why? Everything happens before the meeting. create the small talk, the chit chat, like get to know that person who you may never physically meet, but you meet virtually, all right? Certainly in person. Here's another thing to think about as it relates to relational. At least once a quarter, who is that person that you want to connect with in the organization and say, can we have a virtual coffee, a chew and chat, lunch and learn? Can we maybe meet in person? Can I get 15 minutes? I want to just share some things with you. Relationships are the currency of the future. I don't care how many degrees you have. I don't care how long you've been in the organization. Here's what I know to be true, and I will go to my grave saying it. If you don't have a relationship in the organization, you will not get very far. Relationships are everything. So what's that relationship? What's your relationship equity right now in the organization? Okay. Then attuned. Am I dialed into what's really going on? So let's talk about the micro practices. How many of you, I'm curious, when you see create a safe space, how many of you have a Zen room at your organization? Just by show of hands. 1, 2, 3. Okay. All right. Now, isn't this interesting? I'll be curious if we ask the same question a year from now, how many are implementing a Zen room? You're probably saying, what? That's a little Star Trekky. Okay, not sure. Here's why. About, let's see, 6 months ago, no, a year ago, I was doing some work for an industry, and one of the things that they have done from a attraction and retention standpoint for millennials and Gen Zers, they've implemented a Zen room. Safe space for people to go and just have a moment. Okay. And we know because of some people working hybrid, remote, that may look different. But what's that safe space? Okay. Then when we talk about candor comes down to this, and I want y'all to hear my heart. Okay. Performance reviews need to evolve. And here's why. HR sends out an email to leadership, to management, hey, get your performance reviews in. And then all of a sudden, emails start flying to all of your direct reports, get this in, and it goes back and forth, emails cause people to end up in e-jail, okay? Because lost productivity and getting the report in every 6 months, and goodness gracious, you get to the end of the year, and it's about this person's increase, and all of a sudden, it starts all over again, the hamster wheel. So you're probably saying, Simon, what are you proposing so that we're attuned, ensuring everybody belongs? What if, as leaders, we created a career investment discussion? Every 90 days, 4 questions. Now, why every 90 days? Scientists say that our blood cells in our body change every 90 to 100 days. How many seasons are there in a year? How many quarters are there in a year? Okay, so if there are 4 seasons, I live in Florida, there are 2 seasons, hot and hotter, okay? But here's the point, 4 questions. Question number 1, where have I been? In the last 90 days, where have I been in my career and my job? Question number 2, why are you here? The why are you here is not why did my mom meet my dad? No, why are you here at this job, okay? Question number 3, what can you do? Dr. Kristen Mursko, who is a psychologist at Princeton University, says when the brain is worried because of uncertainty and stress, the brain slows down and doesn't create neurogenesis, which is the process of growing neurons, which grows the brain. So the what can I do question is the Control-Alt-Delete question that deletes from the mind drive and the hard drives, those things that slow us down and invite people to get in touch again with what can I do instead of what I can't do. Research says that by the time a child is 17 years of age, they have heard no 150,000 times and only yes 5,000 times. So the what can I do? All right, at Ritz-Carlton, they teach the answer is yes. Now, what's the question? What can I do? 4th question, where am I going? So in the next 90 days, as I think about where the organization is going, the strategic objectives, everything that we need to do, where am I going? How am I going to show up? You ask that question every 90 days. If a person is thinking about opting out of the organization, you've got an assessment right there. They don't feel the love. They are about to bounce. They are on Indeed.com. They are on Glassdoor.com, married to the job, but looking, all right? I'm just saying. So every 90 days, because if you get to 6 months, it's too late. So every 90 days slows it down a little bit. All right, those are also 4 questions that you as leaders can ask yourself to say, do I still opt in? Do I still feel like I belong? All right, so read the field and embrace all ways of knowing ties into what I've just said is, how am I reading the tea leaves of what's going on? How am I really, really paying attention to what's happening? So we've heard of quiet quitting. Now the new trend is quiet firing. And quiet firing is that the organization, the employers are not going to do anything else for the employees in hopes that they quit. All right? Now, I have to throw the question out, Socratic method of learning. Do y'all think that's the right thing to do? Quiet fitting. I don't know. There's some people that need to be invited to find their happiness elsewhere. If we can't coach them up, coach them out, right? So some organizations have gone to that far extreme of quiet firing, hoping that person opts out. I believe when we come from a human-centric standpoint and we talk about belonging, we really want to help people get a hand up, not just a handout. I stand here today because somebody many years ago who didn't look like me gave me a shot, gave me a chance, invited me to get out of my way and grow. So how, in a spirit of belonging, we help give people feedback so that they can evolve, all right? Let's keep going. So I promised 2 tools. Here's the first tool. So you say, okay, Simon, belonging. Here's the tool, the serve communication model. And in this model, as you make your way through it, I want to just drop a pin in respond. So when I talk about respond, how many of you ever remember getting a call from your leader and it felt like you were being called into the principal's office? Okay, so in our response, in our communication to our team members, the difference between a phone call, a text, an email, just what's happening there. So they're like, oh my goodness, like, am I being called in? What's going on? Am I going to lose my job? You know, what's happening, right? So response is very important. And then when we look at this whole thing of commitment, Corporate Leadership Council says that where there is emotional commitment, individuals are 4 times more productive than rational commitment. Rational commitment is I do what I do because I have to. Emotional commitment is I do what I do because I want to. Now, when you hear emotion, like, Simon, are you saying, as a leader, God bless you, should we like tap into like how people are emotionally doing? Hold the phone, because that could be a trigger while you're trying to send a message, right? So here's how I would approach it. In verifying commitments, say, hey, and your name is, so Carrie, raise your hand. This is Carrie, y'all. Everybody say, hi, Carrie. Okay, so Carrie, if I report it to you, you could say to me, Simon, we just talked about X. What is your sense of what we are doing? And what you're doing, Carrie, when you ask me the questions, what is my sense or what do I see? You're assessing my commitment, okay? Because language is the software of the mind. So what do I sense is a safe way to understand you're verifying that commitment. What do I sense? And then, based on the response, you give a little bit more feedback. Have you thought about, because the power of the leader of the future, sparking empathetic leadership with accountability, is asking, not just telling. Okay? So it's asking that question to draw me out. Because when you ask, the word education comes from a word called educare. Educare is not about putting in, it's about drawing out. And how I draw you out is through the question. Okay? Now, let's keep going. Coaching. So I'm going to share with you a video from a friend of mine. Her name is Selena Rezvani. Selena is one of the top influencers on LinkedIn. She has a number of courses in LinkedIn Learning, absolutely a brilliant person. And I said, Selena, can you coach us how to be a cultural disruptor, okay? Because that's what all of you are, no matter where you sit right now in your organization, you're invited to be a cultural disruptor. So I want you to hear her brilliant wisdom.
Let's jump right in. First of all, inquiring minds want to know, what is a cultural disruptor? Because that's what you are. You're a cultural disruptor. Tell us.
Yes. So here's how I think about it. A culture disruptor to me is first and foremost what I call a PQA. Okay. A perpetual question asker. You know, someone who's not afraid to say, Simon, why do we do it this way? Or why does our process exclude this group? and include this group, right? It's the opposite of do it this way because we've always done it this way. So that's a big piece of culture disruption, right? Asking the questions, challenging norms as standard practice. But it's also things like gathering feedback, quickly incorporating it. For me, that means with employees, gathering that input so their voice is never far away, and trying experiments. Disruption isn't always this grand, large-scale innovation. Sometimes it's little moves and moments. It's little changes that can nudge, a culture disruption along.
Wow.
Okay, so real quick, turn to old Brilliant One and share with them, based on everything you've heard in the last 72 to 48 hours, what's one small little micro step you can take to create cultural disruption. 1 minute, go. Ten seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Take a moment, think it, ink it, write it down. Write it down. And part of the reason why I'm having you share and also write it down is because whoever you shared with, you're now each other's accountability partner. Okay? So if you're sitting with someone that you didn't walk into the room with and you don't work at the same organization, over the next 6 weeks, I want to invite you to check in once a week for at least 5 minutes. This is something that I've been doing here at WFF. This is my 11th year speaking consistently at WFF, and I've had people tell me over 11 years that they meet somebody that they met in my session, and 5, 6 years later, I asked for 6 weeks, they still connect with their accountability partner. Because sometimes you need to talk to someone outside of your current organization to hold your feet to the fire to say, okay, you said, you wrote down, how's it going? All right, now, so let me build on this. And I promised a second tool. So this tool is from Max Lounsden. He gave us permission, myself and Dr. Marcita Riley, we wrote a book called Releasing Leadership Brilliance, and we were looking for a coaching model that organizations can use. So let's start at the bottom left-hand corner. You have individuals on your team that have low will, low skill. How do you, in your communication, come alongside and get to know them personally, help them create a vision, structure quick wins? Because what gets recognized gets repeated if they have low will, low skill. Let's move to the top left-hand corner. You have individuals that have high will, all right, new to the organization, but low skill. How do we guide them in the conversation? Offer up what is working. Understand their learning style, visual, auditory, hands-on. Listen to what Dr. Martin Seligman at University of Pennsylvania calls, he's the father of positive psychology, what's their self-explanatory style? So as they are explaining themselves, pay attention to that language. Then bottom far right-hand corner, you have individuals that have low will, high skill. Those are your tenured team members, been there for a while, they know where all the bodies are buried, they know where the landmines are. Everything that they know is in their head, it's not necessarily written down. So how do we acknowledge what they bring to the table by getting them excited once again, taking them back to what we would call day one? That day one where they had that energy, that fire in their belly, all right? Then ultimately, we have individuals that have high will, high skill. Those are the leaders without a title. Those are the folks that just get it done. They make it happen. How do we delegate to them? Because their influence influences the rest of the team. Now, how many of you, as you look at these quadrants, you're already identifying some team members that you have? Does this help you? Does this kind of guide you in coaching? Okay, all right. So here's the net. It's about becoming. So we talked about being, we talked about belonging, it's about becoming. I asked Harry Kramer, who is the former chairman of Baxter Healthcare, I said, as chairman and CEO, 40-year career, what is the one thing leaders should know? And he says, every leader needs to understand reflection. I said, walk me through that. He said, for the last 40 years, I ask myself 3 questions every day, every night before my head hits the pillow. Question number 1, how did I make a difference today? Question number 2, what did I learn today? When he said learn, it made me think of a quote from Eric Hoffer, a noted philosopher, who says, in times of change, the learners will inherit the earth, while the unlearned will find themselves beautifully equipped to live in a world that no longer exists. What did I learn today? Third question, how will I add value tomorrow? Okay, so those are 3 questions I tee up and I invite you to consider, but I'm gonna throw a 4th question in there. Can I? Say, go on, Simon. Thank you very much. 4th question is, I'm going through a course right now in positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania. 15,000 people are part of this course. You know about the course? Philly, oh, Philly, of course. So in this course, one of the things that Dr. Martin Seligman taught the other day was asking this question, what went well today? And writing down 3 things that went well. And when he said, it was like a joy bomb went off in my head. I was like, what? Because when we enter into the night season to go to sleep, going to sleep with what went well, as we wake up the next day, we're already wired with the intention of here's what went well, and here's how I'm going to make sure today is even better. All right, so I add that 4th question because I think it's interesting. All right, biogenic. Biogenic is a word that's taught in caring science. The opposite of biogenic is biocytic, which comes from the word biocide, which means poisonous language that causes individuals to spiral down. Okay? Biogenic is that positive language that causes individuals to spiral up. Now the question becomes, Simon, are you saying we need to always be positive and shun the negativity? No, embrace the negative. All right? Whoever said, I am never negative, don't believe them, because they'll try to sell you a piece of swampland a little later on. All right? Negativity is a gift. Because when we embrace the negativity, we find our language, we find our words, there are 26 letters in the alphabet, and we begin to assess, how do I now begin to spiral up? Why is that important to leaders? Because when I understand that language is the software of the mind, how do I upgrade my verbal software as I'm inviting people to be the best version of themselves, okay? Then when we talk about attuned, I'm gonna say something that might sound a little controversial. Hear me in the spirit I'm about to say it. It is not your job to help a person find their purpose at work. I am not here to lead you to help you find your purpose. I invite you into an opportunity to release your brilliance. Because a job stands for just overboard. From today forward, when you're attuned, you don't offer any more jobs. You offer opportunities. Because a paycheck is given to people who show up. Opportunities are given to people who think and work beyond what they're paid to do. So if you are invited into an opportunity, you are uncovering your why, your purpose as to what you're doing. So don't stress yourself out, oh my goodness, gotta help them, get with the organizational purpose. Listen, if the organizational purpose does not align to who they are, people work hard enough to keep a job and do just enough to keep from getting fired. I'm just saying. So what's the micro practices under becoming? What has been your key learning? You've heard a lot of great speakers and information, and you're getting ready to hear from my dear friend in the closing session, Mel Robbins. I want you to take a moment, share with Brilliant One, what's your key learning? What's the one thing that's top of mind for you? Go, share. 30 seconds. key learning. Ten seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, awesome. Awesome. So that's your key learning, key takeaway. When I talk about edit word choice, before you hit send, before you send the text, before you send the email, how do I think about, is there a better way? Because behind content is intent. Words carry energy. So what is the outcome that I want on the other side of how people receive this? Detect readiness to grow. How are you ensuring and who are you thinking about right now that you can mentor? You can help take to the next level, giving them a hand up, not a handout. And then finally, how do you engage others in self-discovery? One of my mentors said to me years ago, he said, Simon, you come to me looking for the answer, and it is not my responsibility to tell you the answer, is to invite you to self-discover the answer that's in you. How do I now put up a mirror for you? Now let's add balance to that. Yes, there are some things that are very cut and dry, very black and white, especially when it comes to financial things. But aside from that, how do you help that person come to a place where they self-discover, here's what I need to do, all right? Now, we've got about 2 to 3 minutes for questions. So if you got a question real quick, come to the mic or just shout it out. I'll repeat it because I want to make sure I answer your question. And if there's a question you wanted to ask me, sorry guys, I was hitting up. Can you take it back to my last slide? If there's a question you want to ask me, feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn, send us an email. They're going to put my contact information up and everything. I'll be happy to answer. So question. Yes, ma'am. Yes, so 1 minute spent on recognition creates 100 minutes of initiative. Yeah, so what gets recognized gets repeated, just that 1 minute of recognition, okay? And a part of what I share today when I talk about keratos and leading from a different consciousness is in chapter 4 of the book, Ignite the Power of Women. Tagline, a guide for men, but it's also a guide for women as well, okay? All right, any other questions? All right, so here's the deal. I'm gonna be at the back of the door. I wanna greet you on the way out. Let me just say this, I don't know when I'm going to see you again, but I want you to know, hear me in the spirit that I'm about to say this, I love you, I believe in you, and there's not a darn thing you can do about it. Go and spark empathetic leadership.